The coffee mug shattered against the floor, and Daniel Hayes didn't flinch. He just knelt down and started picking up the pieces. The woman whose elbow had sent it flying stood frozen, mortified, already apologizing before he'd even looked up. He should have been annoyed. He should have walked away. But when their eyes met across the mess of ceramic and spilled caffeine, something shifted. He didn't know it yet, but this stranger, this frazzled, embarrassed woman with paint smudges on her jeans, was about to crack open the life he'd spent 3 years carefully rebuilding. What started as a simple accident would unravel into something far more complicated, something that would force him to choose between the safety of being alone and the terrifying risk of letting someone in again. If you want to see how a broken man and a guarded woman navigate love when both of them have already lost it once, stick around until the end. Drop a like and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Daniel Hayes had perfected the art of invisible mornings. Wake at 6, shower in silence. Make breakfast for Ethan while the house stayed dark and quiet. Pack the lunch. Turkey sandwich, apple slices. The granola bars Ethan actually liked, not the ones his ex-wife used to buy that sat untouched in his backpack. Check the homework folder. Sign the permission slip. Make sure the soccer cleats were by the door. Drive to school. Exchange exactly 3 sentences with the morning drop-off teacher. Good morning. Have a great day. See you tomorrow. Drive to work. Repeat. It wasn't depression, not anymore anyway. That had been the first year when everything still felt raw and impossible. When he'd wake up at 3 in the morning convinced he'd ruined his son's life. When he'd stand in the kitchen making breakfast and forget what he was doing halfway through. When the silence of the house felt less like peace and more like evidence of failure. But that was 3 years ago. He'd done the work, the therapy, the long conversations with his brother who kept telling him it wasn't his fault, that sometimes marriages just ended, that he needed to stop punishing himself. He'd read the books about co-parenting and emotional resilience and how to help your child through divorce. He'd learned to cook more than 3 meals. He'd figured out how to braid hair for the school's crazy hair day, even though Ethan had ultimately decided braids were for babies and wanted spikes instead. What remained now wasn't sadness. It was order, structure, the kind of routine that kept life manageable when you'd already watched it fall apart once and knew exactly how much damage chaos could do. He loved his son. That part was easy. That part had never been complicated. Ethan was 9 now, smart and sarcastic in ways that reminded Daniel of himself before everything got heavy. They had their rhythm. Weeknight dinners where Ethan would complain about math homework, weekend soccer games where Daniel stood on the sidelines with the other parents and made small talk about game strategy. The occasional movie if Ethan didn't have homework and Daniel wasn't too exhausted. It was enough. It had to be. Dating wasn't part of the equation. Daniel had tried it once, about a year after the divorce was finalized. A setup from a well-meaning coworker who'd cornered him in the break room and insisted she knew someone perfect for him. She's sweet, she's funny, she's normal, his coworker had said, as if normal was the highest compliment available. You need to get back out there, Daniel. You can't just be a dad forever. Except he could, and he was planning on it. But he'd agreed to the date anyway, mostly because saying no required more explanation than he wanted to give. The woman had been nice, too nice actually, in that aggressive way that made him feel like he was failing a test he hadn't studied for. She'd asked all the right questions, laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny, suggested a second date before the first one had even ended. But when he'd mentioned Ethan in passing, just a casual reference, something about weekend plans, her smile had tightened, not in a cruel way, just in a way that said, "Oh, you come with complications." She'd still said yes to a second date, but there was a new carefulness in her voice, a slight distance that hadn't been there before. He'd recognized it immediately. The mental calculation, the weighing of pros and cons, the quiet realization that dating a single parent meant signing up for more than just dinner and conversation. He hadn't called her back. After that, he'd decided it was easier to focus on what he could control. Work. Ethan. The small, predictable corners of life that didn't require him to explain himself or apologize for the baggage he carried. He wasn't bitter about it. He wasn't even particularly sad. He'd just accepted it as a fact. His life was full. There wasn't room for anything else. So when he walked into the coffee shop that Tuesday afternoon in late September, the last thing on his mind was meeting someone. It was one of those places that tried too hard. Exposed brick walls covered in local art that rotated monthly, mismatched vintage furniture that looked like it had been rescued from various estate sales. A chalkboard menu written in looping cursive that made ordering feel like a personality test. The kind of place that attracted freelancers with laptops and retirees with paperback novels and college students who needed somewhere to look productive. Daniel didn't care about the aesthetic. The coffee was decent, it was close to his office, and the line moved quickly. That was all that mattered. He was halfway through placing his order, large black coffee, nothing fancy, when he heard the crash. It wasn't loud exactly, just the sharp, unmistakable sound of ceramic meeting tile. The kind of sound that makes everyone in a public space stop what they're doing and look. He turned, along with half the shop, and saw her. She was standing near one of the small tables by the window, staring down at the shattered mug with the kind of horror usually reserved for actual disasters. Her hands were frozen in midair, like she was still processing what had just happened, like her brain hadn't caught up with her body yet. A puddle of coffee spread across the floor, dark and glossy under the afternoon light, seeping toward the chair legs. "Oh my God," she said, her voice pitched somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't..." The barista, a kid with bleached hair and about 15 ear piercings, waved her off with the practiced nonchalance of someone who'd seen worse. "It's fine, don't worry about it. Happens all the time." But the woman, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled into a messy bun and paint smudges on her jeans and what looked like exhaustion carved into the lines around her eyes, didn't look reassured. She looked like someone who'd just added one more thing to a very long list of things going wrong. Like this broken mug was somehow representative of everything else in her life that felt fractured and unfixable. Daniel didn't think. He just moved. "Here," he said, crouching down beside her and picking up one of the larger pieces. "It's not that bad." She blinked at him, startled, like she genuinely hadn't expected anyone to help. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He shrugged, carefully stacking the ceramic shards in his palm. "But I'm already down here, so..." For a second, she just stared at him. Then, slowly, she crouched down too, carefully gathering the smaller pieces into her hand. Her fingers were shaking slightly, he noticed. Not from fear or shock, just from whatever stress she'd been carrying before she'd even walked in here. "I swear I'm not usually this much of a disaster," she said, her voice quieter now. More real. My phone rang and I turned too fast and my bag caught the handle and..." She shook her head, laughing at herself in a way that didn't sound happy. "I don't know why I'm explaining this to you. You don't care." Maybe because I'm the only one still helping," Daniel said, the corner of his mouth twitching. She glanced up at him, and for the first time he noticed her eyes. Brown, sharp, a little tired. The kind of eyes that looked like they'd seen enough to stop expecting things to go smoothly. The kind that had learned to brace for disappointment. "Fair point," she said. They finished cleaning up in silence, handing the pieces to the barista, who dumped them in a trash bag with theatrical indifference. Daniel grabbed a handful of napkins from the dispenser and wiped up the last of the coffee while the woman stood brushing off her jeans and checking her phone with a grimace. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it. Not in a polite, automatic way, but in a way that suggested she wasn't used to people stepping in without being asked. "You really didn't have to do that." "No problem." He straightened, tossing the napkins into the trash. "Happens to everyone." "Not to everyone," she said, smiling faintly. "Just the chronically clumsy." He almost walked away then. Almost nodded, grabbed his coffee from the counter where it was waiting, and disappeared back into his carefully ordered life. Back to work. Back to emails and project timelines and the meeting he had in 45 minutes. Back to normal. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the way she looked. Frazzled and human in a way that felt familiar. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't seem to expect anything from him, which made him want to offer something. Maybe it was just that he'd been living in his head for so long that doing one spontaneous thing felt like a small rebellion against his own caution. "You want another one?" he asked, nodding toward the counter. "On me, since yours is currently all over the floor." She hesitated, and he could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. The same one he would have done in her position. Is this guy being nice, or is this guy being nice? Is there an expectation buried in this offer? Is this going to turn into something uncomfortable? You don't have to do that, she said finally. I know. He shrugged again, keeping his voice casual. Easy, no pressure. But I'm offering anyway. Another pause. Her eyes flicked to the door like she was considering just leaving, cutting her losses and getting out before this turned into a thing. But then something shifted in her expression, something that looked like a decision being made. Okay, she said slowly. Thanks. That's really nice of you. They ordered, her a latte with oat milk, him a black coffee, both of them ignoring the barista's smirk, and somehow ended up sitting at the same table she'd just destroyed. It wasn't planned. It just happened. She sat down first, pulling out her phone and clearly intending to just wait for her drink. But then Daniel sat down across from her because standing felt weird, and suddenly they were sharing a table. I'm Clara, by the way, she said, wrapping her hands around the new mug when it arrived, like she was afraid it might escape, or like she needed something to hold on to. In case you were wondering who you just rescued from public humiliation. Daniel. Well, Daniel, thanks for not letting me slink out of here in complete shame. I appreciate it. Anytime. You make a habit of helping random disaster-prone women in coffee shops? First time, actually. You're breaking new ground. She laughed at that. A real laugh, not a polite one. The kind that crinkled the corners of her eyes and made her look about 5 years younger. They talked. Not about anything important at first. Just the kind of aimless conversation that happens when two strangers find themselves in the same place with nothing better to do and no reason to perform. She told him she was an illustrator, freelance, which explained the pain on her jeans and the smudges on her hands that she kept trying to wipe off. He told her he worked in project management for a tech company, which he described as exactly as boring as it sounds. I don't know, she said, tilting her head. I feel like every job sounds boring when you sum it up like that. Like, I draw pictures for a living. That sounds either incredibly cool or incredibly childish, depending on how you frame it. What do you draw? Mostly children's books. Sometimes editorial stuff if the pay's good enough. A lot of anthropomorphic animals with emotional problems. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's specific. You have no idea how many picture books are just thinly veiled therapy for kids. Sad rabbits learning to share. Anxious bears going to school. Divorced frogs figuring out co-parenting. There are divorced frogs? There are so many divorced frogs, Daniel, so many. He laughed, surprised by how easy this felt, how normal. He'd forgotten what it was like to just talk to someone without the conversation feeling like an interview or an obligation. So what's the exciting version of project management? Clara asked, leaning back in her chair. Because I'm guessing it's not just spreadsheets and meetings. It's definitely spreadsheets and meetings. Come on, there has to be something interesting. Daniel considered this. I guess I make sure things don't fall apart. Like, a bunch of people are trying to build something, and my job is to keep everyone on the same page so the whole thing doesn't collapse. So you're a professional chaos preventer, essentially. That's kind of impressive, actually. I can barely keep my own life from falling apart, let alone other people's. That's just life, though, Daniel said, trying not to let everything fall apart. Clara's smile faded slightly, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. A recognition. Like they were both people who knew what it felt like to hold things together by sheer force of will. Yeah, she said quietly. I guess it is. They talked for 20 minutes. Maybe 30. Long enough that Daniel completely forgot about the meeting he was supposed to be preparing for. Long enough that when he finally glanced at his watch, he realized he was going to be late getting back to the office. I should go, he said, standing reluctantly. I have a thing. Yeah, me too. She stood as well, slinging her bag over her shoulder. It was covered in pins, random things, cartoon characters, political slogans, a pin that just said tired in block letters. Thanks again for the coffee and the rescue operation. Don't mention it. I mean it, though. That was really nice. It was just coffee. Still. She smiled at him, and it was the kind of smile that felt genuine, earned. The world needs more people who help pick up broken things. He thought that would be the end of it. A nice, forgettable interaction with a stranger. The kind of thing you think about once on the drive home and then never again. A small moment of human decency in an otherwise ordinary day. But 3 days later, he saw her again. Same coffee shop, different time, mid-morning instead of afternoon, different table. She was sitting by the window this time, laptop open, headphones in, completely absorbed in whatever she was working on. She had a pencil tucked behind her ear and was making quick, decisive marks on a drawing tablet, her face scrunched in concentration. Daniel almost didn't go over, almost just ordered his coffee and left, because approaching her would turn their first meeting into a pattern, and patterns implied intention. But then she looked up, probably sensing someone staring, and their eyes met. Her expression shifted. Surprise, then recognition, then something that looked like genuine pleasure. She pulled out one earbud and waved him over. "We have to stop meeting like this," he said, walking to her table. She smirked. "You're the one who keeps showing up at my coffee shop." "Your coffee shop? I've been coming here for 2 years. I'm pretty sure I have squatter's rights." "That's not how squatter's rights work." "Are you a lawyer?" "No." "Then I'm claiming it." She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "You can stay, though, as my guest." He sat down, and just like that, they were talking again. She showed him what she was working on, a children's book about a raccoon who was afraid of the dark, which she described as obviously a metaphor for anxiety, but with more garbage eating. He told her about the project at work that was slowly driving him insane, where half the team wanted to move in one direction and the other half wanted to do the exact opposite, and his job was somehow to make everyone happy. "That sounds exhausting," Clara said. "It is. Why do you do it?" Daniel paused, considering the question. "Because someone has to, and I'm good at it, and it pays for—" He stopped himself. "For?" Clara prompted. "Just life stuff. Bills, groceries, the boring things." She nodded, like she understood there were things he wasn't saying, and instead of pushing, she just moved on. He liked that about her, the way she could sense boundaries and respected them without making a thing out of it. It became a pattern after that. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence. Often enough that he started looking for her when he walked in, and sometimes she was there, and sometimes she wasn't. But when she was, they'd talk. They never exchanged numbers, never made plans. It stayed loose and undefined, which felt safer somehow. Less like pressure. Just two people who happened to occupy the same space sometimes and enjoyed the company. She told him about her clients, the children's book authors who had very strong opinions about whether animals should wear clothes or be anatomically accurate, the art directors who asked for revisions that made no sense, the deadlines that always seemed to land at the worst possible time. He told her about Ethan, in the careful, edited way he always did with new people. Enough to acknowledge his son existed. Enough to explain why he couldn't always meet up, or why he had to leave early sometimes. Not enough to scare anyone off. She never asked for more than he offered. Never pressed for details about his ex-wife or the divorce or why he was raising Ethan mostly on his own. She just listened, nodded, and moved on. He liked that about her too. A month passed, then 2. October bled into November. The coffee shop started putting up holiday decorations way too early, and Clara complained about it every time. "It's not even Thanksgiving," she'd say, glaring at the paper snowflakes. "This is psychological warfare." One afternoon in mid-November, after they'd spent an hour debating whether outdoor cats were an ecological disaster or just living their best lives, Clara was firmly in the disaster camp. Daniel thought people were being dramatic. He did something he hadn't done in 3 years. "Do you want to get dinner sometime?" he asked. Clara looked up from her coffee, her expression shifting from casual to startled in the space of a heartbeat. "Like, dinner? Yeah." "Like a date?" "Yeah." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the wheels turning, the same wariness he felt in his own chest reflected back at him, the same quiet calculation. Is this worth the risk? "Can I ask you something first?" she said. "Sure. Why now? We've been doing this thing for what, 2 months? Why ask me out now?" Daniel thought about lying, about saying something smooth or casual that would make it seem like no big deal. But Clara deserved better than that. "Because I like talking to you," he said simply, "and I want to keep doing it. And I thought maybe doing it over actual food instead of just coffee might be nice." Claire's expression softened. That's a good answer. So? Okay, she said finally. Yeah, dinner sounds good. They picked a place. Nothing fancy, just a small Italian restaurant downtown that didn't require reservations or overthinking. They set a date for the following Friday. Daniel spent the intervening week trying not to overthink it, which of course meant he overthought it constantly. He told himself it was just dinner. Just two people who already got along trying out a slightly different format. Nothing dramatic. Nothing life-changing. But when Friday came and he was sitting in his car outside the restaurant 15 minutes early, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tight, he had to admit the truth. He was nervous. Actually genuinely nervous in a way he hadn't been in years. Not about whether Clara would like him. They'd been talking for months, so that ship had sailed. But about what happened next. About whether this would ruin the easy thing they already had. About whether he was ready for this to become real. He almost texted her to cancel. Almost convinced himself this was a bad idea, that he should just keep things the way they were, safe and undefined. But then she walked up to the restaurant, and he saw her through the window. And she looked nervous, too. Hands shoved in her jacket pockets, shoulders hunched slightly against the cold. And something about seeing that vulnerability made his own fear feel less overwhelming. He got out of the car. "Hey," he said when he reached the door. "Hey." She smiled, but it was smaller than usual, more uncertain. "You ready for this?" "Honestly, no idea." "Same." They laughed, and some of the tension broke. Inside, the restaurant was warm and dimly lit. The kind of place where every table had a candle and the music was just loud enough to cover awkward silences. They ordered wine, red for her, white for him, and shared an appetizer that neither of them were particularly hungry for but gave them something to do with their hands. The conversation started stiff, formal, like they were both trying too hard to make this feel like a date instead of just another coffee shop hangout. But after the first glass of wine, things loosened up. Clara told him about the absolutely unhinged email she'd gotten from a client who wanted her to redraw an entire book because they'd decided the main character should be a hedgehog instead of a porcupine. Daniel told her about the team meeting where two of his coworkers had gotten into an actual argument about font choices that had lasted 45 minutes. 45 minutes? Clara said, laughing. About fonts? I timed it. I thought someone was going to throw a chair. What font were they even arguing about? Helvetica versus Arial. Those are basically the same thing. That's what I said. But apparently if you care about fonts, them's fighting words. They talked about work and the ridiculousness of adulthood and the weird neighbor in Daniel's building who collected garden gnomes and arranged them in different scenes every week. They talked about the fact that Clara had once accidentally dyed her hair green in college because she'd left the dye in too long while watching a movie. They talked about everything and nothing, and slowly the nervousness faded. It felt easy again, natural, like slipping into a conversation they'd been having for years instead of weeks. And then halfway through the main course, Clara had ordered pasta, Daniel had gotten chicken. Clara put down her fork and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I should probably tell you something," she said. Daniel's stomach tightened. Here it comes, he thought. The catch, the complication. The reason this won't work. "Okay," he said carefully, setting down his own fork. Clara took a breath, her fingers drumming against the edge of the table, a nervous gesture he'd never seen her do before. "I have kids," she said, the words coming out quickly, like ripping off a bandage. "Two of them, a daughter who's 7 and a son who's 5. And I know that's a lot, and I know most people aren't interested in signing up for that. So if you want to just finish dinner and call it a night, I get it. No hard feelings." She said it all in one breath, barely pausing, like she'd practiced this speech before and knew exactly how it would go. Like she'd done this before and watched people's expressions change. Watched them do the mental math and decide she wasn't worth the complication. Daniel stared at her, not because he was shocked, not because it changed anything, but because he hadn't expected her to sound so defeated, so resigned to rejection. "Okay," he said. Clara blinked. "Okay? Yeah, okay. That's it? I mean, unless there's more you want to tell me." She stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. Most guys, when I tell them that, they're done. Like, immediately. Even if they pretend otherwise, I can see it. The math they're doing. The exit they're planning. Daniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He understood that math. He'd seen it done to him. I get it, he said. I really do. You do? Yeah, because I've been on the other side of that conversation. He paused, then said it, the thing he'd been holding back for months. I have a kid too. His name's Ethan. He's 9. Clara's mouth opened, then closed. She looked like someone had just pulled the rug out from under her. You what? Yeah. You never mentioned that. Neither did you. I know, but… She shook her head, laughing in disbelief. I've been so careful not to bring it up too soon because it usually ends things. And you're telling me you've had a kid this whole time. I didn't bring it up because I didn't want to deal with the look, Daniel said quietly. What look? The one that says, oh, you come with baggage. You come with complications. You're not just a person anymore. You're a person plus all this other stuff that I didn't sign up for. He picked up his wine glass, swirling it absently. I've seen that look enough times to know when to avoid it. Clara stared at him, and something in her expression cracked. Not in a breaking way, in an opening way. Yeah, she said softly. That look. I know that look. They sat in silence for a moment, the noise of the restaurant filling the space between them. Other people's conversations, laughter from a nearby table. The clink of silverware against plates. Normal sounds, life sounds. But in their little corner, something significant was happening. Something neither of them had quite expected. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way, just a small recalibration, a sense that maybe, for the first time in a long time, he was sitting across from someone who actually understood, who'd walked the same difficult road and come out the other side still trying. So, Clara said finally, her voice lighter now, but still careful, does this make us even? I think it makes us complicated. I can live with complicated. She picked up her fork again, twirling pasta around it without eating. I'm kind of an expert at complicated at this point. Yeah, me too. How long have you been doing the single parent thing? 3 years? You? 4. That's rough. You too. Clara finally ate the bite of pasta, chewing thoughtfully. What's it like? With your son? Ethan? He's good. Great, actually. Loves soccer, hates math homework, thinks I'm the most embarrassing person alive whenever I try to be cool. Clara laughed. Mine think I'm embarrassing just for existing. My daughter told me last week that I'm not allowed to wave at her when I drop her off at school anymore because it's cringe. She's 7 and already using the word cringe? I know. I don't know where she learned it. Probably YouTube. They talked about their kids for a while after that, but carefully. Surface-level stuff. Funny stories. Small frustrations. The kind of sharing that didn't require vulnerability. It felt safe. Manageable. Neither of them pushed for more. When the check came, Daniel grabbed it before Clara could. I asked you out, he said when she protested. I'm paying. That's very old-fashioned of you. I'm an old-fashioned guy. Are you, though? Absolutely not. But I'm paying anyway. They left the restaurant together, stepping out into the cold November night. The air was sharp and clear, carrying the smell of oncoming winter. Clara pulled her jacket tighter, her breath visible in the air. So, she said, turning to face him, was this as weird as I think it was? Definitely. Good. I wasn't sure if it was just me. They stood there on the sidewalk, neither of them quite ready to leave. Cars passed on the street. People walked by, heading to other restaurants, other lives. But Daniel and Clara just stood there, suspended in that strange space between an ending and a beginning. I had a good time, Daniel said, weirdness included. Me too. Thanks for not running when I dropped the kid bomb. Thanks for not running when I dropped mine, Clara laughed, but there was something vulnerable in it. So what happens now? I don't know. What do you want to happen? She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I think I want to do this again. If you do. I do. Yeah? Yeah. Okay then. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Let's do this again. They went on another date the following week, then another the week after that. Coffee shops turned into dinners, turned into long walks through the city where they talked about everything except the things that actually mattered. They kept it light, easy, surface level enough that neither of them had to risk too much. Clara was different from anyone Daniel had dated before the divorce. She didn't need him to be anything other than what he was. Didn't ask him to fix things or make promises he couldn't keep or fill some specific role in her life. She just existed beside him in a way that felt natural instead of forced. But there was a line she wouldn't cross. She never invited him to her place, never suggested meeting on weekends when her kids were around, never let the conversation drift too far into the specifics of her life outside their carefully contained dates. If he asked about her daughter or son, she'd answer, but only in broad strokes. Never details, never anything that would give him a real picture of what her life actually looked like. Daniel didn't push. He understood boundaries. He had plenty of his own. He'd never suggested Ethan meet her, never brought her around on the weekends when his son was with him. They existed in this careful middle space, dating but not integrated, connected but separate. It worked. For a while. But after 2 months of this, 2 months of dinners and conversation and growing closer without actually letting each other in, the distance started to feel deliberate, like she was keeping him in a separate compartment, away from the parts of her life that actually mattered. And maybe he was doing the same thing. Maybe they were both so good at protecting themselves that they'd forgotten how to actually let someone in. One night in early January, after dinner at a Thai place that Clara loved, Daniel finally asked the question that had been building in him for weeks. "Do you not want me to meet them?" Clara looked up sharply from her pad thai, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. "What?" "Your kids," Daniel said. "You've never mentioned it, never even hinted at it. And I'm not trying to rush anything. I'm really not. I'm just wondering if that's something you even want, or if this is always going to be separate." She set down her fork slowly, her expression unreadable. The restaurant noise continued around them. Other conversations, other lives, but their table had gone quiet. "It's not that I don't want it," she said finally, her voice careful, measured. "It's just complicated. Everything with us is complicated. That's kind of our thing. This is different." She exhaled, rubbing her temples, a gesture he'd seen her do when she was stressed, when she was trying to figure out how to say something difficult. The last guy I dated, this was about a year ago, he seemed great at first, really great. Said all the right things, didn't run when I told him about the kids, even acted interested in meeting them. So I thought, okay, maybe this is it. Maybe this is someone who can handle the reality. She paused, her jaw tight. And then he came over, and he saw what my life actually looked like, the mess, the noise, the chaos. My daughter was having a meltdown because her brother had touched her stuffed animal. There were dishes in the sink and toys everywhere, and I was trying to make dinner while also helping with homework and also breaking up a fight about whose turn it was on the iPad. And I could see it in his face, this look of, I don't know, horror, overwhelm, like he'd just realized what he'd signed up for. "What happened?" Daniel asked quietly. "He left, made up some excuse about work, and then he texted me the next day saying he didn't think it was going to work out, that he liked me, but he wasn't ready for all of that." She looked down at her plate. "And I get it. I do. It's a lot. Most people can't handle it. Most people want someone less complicated." "I'm not most people, Clara." "I know." Her voice softened, but the wariness remained. "But I need to protect them, and myself. I can't let someone in just to watch them leave again. My daughter's at the age where she notices things, where she'd ask questions. I can't introduce her to someone unless I know they're staying." Daniel reached across the table, covering her hand with his. It was cold, he noticed, like she'd been holding herself tense this whole time. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Clara looked at him, and for the first time he saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of him, fear of hope, fear of believing something good might actually work out. "You don't know that," she said. "You think you do, but you haven't seen it yet. You haven't seen what my life is really like when it's not just me on a date, cleaned up, and on my best behavior. You haven't seen me at 7 in the morning trying to get 2 kids ready for school while also answering work emails and realizing we're out of milk and the dog threw up on the carpet. You have a dog? That's not the point. I know, but for the record, I like dogs." Clara's lips twitched despite herself. Daniel, I'm serious. I know you're trying to scare me off. And I get why. But I'm not some guy who doesn't know what he's getting into. I have a kid too, remember? I know what mornings look like. I know about meltdowns and homework battles and the fact that nothing ever goes smoothly. I know what it's like to be exhausted and overwhelmed and just trying to keep everyone alive and functional. It's different when they're not your kids. Maybe, but I'd like the chance to find out. He squeezed her hand gently. You don't have to decide right now. I'm not trying to force anything, but I don't want to keep doing this thing where we're together, but not really together. Where we're dating, but I'm not allowed into your actual life. That's not fair to either of us. Clara stared down at their joined hands, her expression conflicted. He could practically see the war happening inside her, the part that wanted to say yes, the part that was terrified of what yes might mean. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she looked up at him. Okay, she said. Okay? Yeah, okay, you can meet them. She took a shaky breath. But don't say I didn't warn you. Warned, Daniel said, and I'm still in. We'll see, Clara said, but there was something softer in her voice now, something that sounded almost like hope. We'll see. Clara texted him 3 times before the actual day arrived. The first text came 2 days after their conversation at the Thai restaurant. Still sure about this? No judgment if you want to back out. Daniel replied, still sure. The second text came the night before. Fair warning. My house is a disaster, and I'm not apologizing for it. Daniel, noted, still coming. The third text arrived at 7 in the morning on the day itself. My son just informed me he's only eating orange food today. This is the kind of chaos you're walking into. Daniel stared at his phone, lying in bed, Ethan still asleep down the hall. He typed back, does macaroni and cheese count as orange? Clara, you're hired. He smiled despite the nerves twisting in his stomach. He'd been awake since 5:30, which was ridiculous because he wasn't supposed to be at Clara's until 2 in the afternoon. But his brain had decided that sleep was optional when faced with the possibility of completely screwing this up. Ethan wandered into the kitchen around 8, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. Why are you making pancakes? He asked, suspicious. You only make pancakes on weekends. Can I just make pancakes? You're being weird. I'm not being weird. You're definitely being weird. Ethan climbed onto a stool at the counter, watching Daniel flip a pancake with more focus than the task required. Are you nervous about something? No? You're a bad liar. Daniel sighed, setting down the spatula. I'm meeting someone today. A friend. And her kids. Ethan's eyebrows shot up. A friend or a girlfriend friend? When did you become a detective? Mom says you never tell me anything important. Daniel bit back the response that immediately came to mind. Something about how his ex-wife had no business commenting on what he did or didn't tell their son, and focused on the pancakes instead. She's someone I've been seeing. Her name's Clara, and she has 2 kids, a girl and a boy. Are they cool? I don't know. I haven't met them yet. Then why are you nervous? Out of the mouths of 9-year-olds. Daniel slid a pancake onto Ethan's plate, buying himself time to figure out how to explain this in a way that made sense. Because I want them to like me. And I want Clara to feel good about me meeting them. Why wouldn't they like you? It's complicated. That's what adults always say when they don't want to explain things. Yeah, well, sometimes things actually are complicated. Ethan drowned his pancake in syrup, unbothered by existential relationship anxiety. If she's nice to you, she's probably okay. That's what Mom always says about people. Your mom's not wrong about that. Are you going to marry her? Daniel nearly dropped the spatula. What? No, I mean, I don't know. We just started dating. But you like her. Yeah, I like her. Then maybe you will. Ethan said it with the casual certainty of a kid who hadn't yet learned that liking someone wasn't always enough. That the world was full of complications and timing and baggage that could ruin even the best intentions. Daniel didn't correct him, just ruffled his hair and told him to finish his breakfast. By the time 2 o'clock rolled around, Daniel had changed shirts 3 times, talked himself out of bringing flowers because that felt too formal, then talked himself into bringing flowers because showing up empty-handed felt wrong, then settled on bringing cookies from the bakery Ethan liked because kids liked cookies, and this was really about the kids, wasn't it? Claire's house was in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from his apartment. Older homes, tall trees, the kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors. Her house was a small two-story with blue siding that needed repainting and a front yard scattered with toys that hadn't been put away. A bike lay on its side near the driveway. A soccer ball sat in the flower bed. The mailbox had stickers on it. It looked lived in, real. The kind of place where life happened messily and no one pretended otherwise. Daniel sat in his car for a full minute, staring at the front door, before he finally forced himself to get out. He made it halfway up the walkway before the door flew open and a small human came barreling out. "Mom, there's a strange man in our yard." The kid, had to be the 5-year-old son, based on size and energy level, was wearing a superhero cape and mismatched socks and had what looked like marker all over his hands. Clara appeared in the doorway looking harried and beautiful and slightly panicked. "That's not a strange man, that's Daniel. Remember? I told you he was coming over." "Oh." The kid squinted at Daniel with open skepticism. "Do you like dinosaurs?" Daniel said. "Yeah? What's your favorite? Probably a T-Rex?" The kid's face scrunched up in disappointment. "That's everyone's favorite. That's a boring answer." "Oliver," Clara said, her voice strained with the particular exhaustion of a parent trying to keep it together. "Go back inside and wash your hands. You're covered in marker again." "But I'm drawing." "You can draw after you wash your hands." "That doesn't make sense." "Oliver, now." The kid, Oliver, gave Daniel one last suspicious look before trudging back inside, cape dragging behind him. Clara stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. She looked tired, not in a superficial way, but in the deep-down way that came from not enough sleep and too many responsibilities and the constant low-level stress of keeping small humans alive. "Hi," she said. "Hi." Daniel held up the bakery box. "I brought cookies." "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but I did anyway." She smiled, but it was tight, nervous. "I'm sorry about Oliver. He's in a phase where he's suspicious of everyone. Last week he interrogated the mail carrier about whether she was a robot." "What'd she say?" "That she wished she was, because robots don't have back pain." Daniel laughed, and some of the tension in Clara's shoulders eased. "You ready for this?" she asked. "Honestly, no idea." "Same." She opened the door, gesturing him inside. "Welcome to the chaos." The first thing Daniel noticed was the noise. Not bad noise, just constant noise. A TV was on somewhere, playing what sounded like a cartoon. Music was coming from upstairs, pop music, the kind with repetitive lyrics that wormed into your brain and stayed there. Something was beeping in the kitchen, probably a timer. And underneath it all was just the ambient sound of a house where people actually lived. Footsteps, voices, the hum of existence. The second thing he noticed was that Clara hadn't been exaggerating about the mess. Toys were everywhere. Not in a neglectful way, just in the way of a house where kids existed and putting things away was a losing battle. Shoes by the door, backpacks on the floor, a stack of mail on a side table that looked like it had been there for weeks, drawings taped to the walls. A laundry basket on the couch. It looked like his place on a bad week. It looked normal. "Sorry," Clara said, moving a pile of books off the couch so he could sit. "I tried to clean up, but then Oliver spilled juice on the rug and that turned into a whole thing. And Clara," Daniel said, "it's fine. Really." She looked at him like she didn't quite believe him, but wanted to. Oliver reappeared, hands slightly cleaner but still marker-stained, and climbed onto the arm of the couch to stare at Daniel from closer range. "What's in the box?" he asked. "Cookies." "What kind?" "Chocolate chip and sugar cookies with frosting." Oliver's eyes widened. "Mom, can I have one?" "After lunch," Clara said automatically. "But he brought them now, and they'll still be here after lunch, That's not fair." "Life's not fair, buddy. You'll figure that out eventually." A girl appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, 7 years old, dark hair like Clara's, wearing leggings and an oversized shirt that probably belonged to her mother. She was holding a tablet and looked distinctly unimpressed by the presence of a stranger. "Who's that?" she asked, not looking up from the screen. "This is Daniel," Clara said. Daniel, this is my daughter, Sophie." "Hi," Daniel said. Sophie finally looked up, gave him a quick once-over, then returned her attention to the tablet. Are you Mom's boyfriend? Clara's face went red. Sophie? What? You said he was coming over. You only have people over if they're important. That doesn't mean you get to interrogate him. I'm just asking a question.
Daniel fought back a smile. It's okay. Yeah, we're dating. Sophie considered this. Do you live here now? No. Are you going to? Sophie, that's enough, Clara said, her voice firm now. Go put the tablet away. I told you no screens until after lunch. 5 more minutes? You said that 10 minutes ago. Please? No, put it away.
Sophie huffed dramatically, but complied, disappearing back into the kitchen with the exaggerated stomping of a child who'd perfected the art of protest. Clara turned to Daniel, looking mortified. I'm so sorry. They're usually not this. Actually, no, this is exactly what they're like. This is why I warned you. They're fine, Daniel said, and he meant it. This was normal. This was kids being kids. He'd take this over polite, uncomfortable silence any day. Oliver was still perched on the couch arm, swinging his legs and studying Daniel with the intensity of a scientist observing a new specimen. Do you have any kids? He asked. Yeah, a son. His name's Ethan. How old is he? 9. Does he like dinosaurs? He likes soccer mostly. Oliver made a face. Soccer's boring. Oliver, Clara warned. What? It is. You just kick a ball around. That's kind of how all sports work, Daniel said. You do something with a ball. Oliver thought about this. What about swimming? There's no ball in swimming. That's true. Swimming's different. I like swimming. Mom says I swim like a fish. Mom says you swim like a maniac and give the instructors heart attacks, Sophie called from the kitchen. That's the same thing. Clara rubbed her temples. Daniel recognized the gesture, the universal sign of a parent at the end of their rope but still trying to hold it together. Okay, Clara said, her voice taking on a brightness that sounded forced. Who wants lunch? Oliver shot off the couch like he'd been launched. Sophie emerged from the kitchen, and just like that, the house descended into the particular chaos of mealtime with children. The kitchen was small and cluttered in the way kitchens with kids always were. Drawings on the fridge, dishes in the sink, a grocery list on the counter that had been added to so many times it was barely legible. Clara moved through it with practiced efficiency, pulling out bread and peanut butter and jelly while simultaneously breaking up an argument about who got which plate. Can I help? Daniel asked, feeling useless standing in the doorway. You really don't have to. I know, but I'm offering. Clara hesitated, then handed him a knife. You can make sandwiches. Oliver likes his cut into triangles. Sophie likes hers cut into rectangles. Don't ask me why, it's just a thing. Shapes matter, Sophie said seriously, climbing onto a stool at the kitchen island. Apparently, Daniel said, starting on the sandwiches. Oliver launched into a detailed explanation of why triangles were superior sandwich shapes, something about structural integrity and how they fit better in your mouth. Sophie argued that rectangles were more practical because you could eat them in even bites. It devolved into the kind of argument that had no winner and no real stakes, but somehow felt deeply important to everyone involved. Clara caught Daniel's eye across the kitchen and mouthed, "This is every meal." He grinned. Lunch was loud and chaotic and nothing like the quiet, ordered meals he had with Ethan. Oliver spilled his juice within the first 5 minutes, which led to a whole production of cleaning it up while he insisted it wasn't his fault because the cup was too full. Sophie critiqued the sandwich-to-chip ratio on her plate. Clara answered 17 different questions while also trying to eat her own lunch, which she barely touched because she was too busy managing everyone else. Daniel found himself jumping in without thinking, grabbing napkins when the juice spilled, cutting up Oliver's sandwich when he declared it too big, answering Sophie's question about whether penguins were fish or birds. It felt natural, easy even, like stepping into a rhythm he already knew. After lunch, the kids disappeared into the living room to watch a movie, and Clara finally exhaled. You're still here, she said, leaning against the kitchen counter. Did you think I'd leave? Maybe. Most people do. Most people are idiots. She laughed, but it sounded exhausted. They're a lot. They're great. You're lying. I'm not. They're funny and smart and, yeah, they're a lot, but that's just kids. He started loading dishes into the dishwasher, ignoring her protests. Ethan once had a full meltdown because I cut his sandwich wrong, like tears and screaming over a sandwich, so trust me, I get it. Clara watched him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. You're really not bothered by this. Should I be? Everyone else is. Then everyone else is missing out. She looked like she wanted to believe him but couldn't quite let herself. From the living room came a crash, followed by Oliver's voice. It wasn't me! Clara closed her eyes. I'll get it, Daniel said. He found Oliver standing next to a toppled floor lamp, looking guilty and defensive in equal measure. Sophie was on the couch, pointedly ignoring the whole situation. What happened? Daniel asked. I was just trying to make a fort, and the lamp fell over. By itself? Maybe I pulled the blanket too hard. Okay, let's fix it. They righted the lamp together, and Daniel showed Oliver how to drape the blanket over the couch without pulling down everything in its path. Within minutes, they had a decent fort constructed, and Oliver was delighted. Can you come inside? Oliver asked, already crawling into the blanket cave. Sure. They sat in the cramped space under the blanket, the TV light filtering through the fabric, and Oliver immediately launched into a story about his favorite dinosaur, a Pachycephalosaurus, which he explained in great detail was way cooler than a T-Rex because it had a thick skull and could headbutt things. That's pretty cool, Daniel admitted. See? I told you T-Rex was a boring answer. Sophie poked her head into the fort. Can I come in? No, Oliver said. It's full. It's not full. There's room. My fort. My rules. Mom! Sophie yelled. Clara appeared, looking between the fort and her daughter's indignant face. What's the problem? Oliver won't let me in the fort. Oliver, let your sister in the fort. But I built it. You built it in the living room, which is shared space. Let her in. Oliver grumbled, but moved over, and Sophie crawled in, sitting between Daniel and her brother. It was tight and uncomfortable, and the blanket kept trying to fall down, but neither kid seemed to care. They watched the movie like that, Daniel wedged into a child-sized fort, listening to Oliver provide unnecessary commentary on every scene, and Sophie occasionally correcting him. Clara sat on the couch above them, and at one point Daniel looked up and caught her watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between hope and terror. When the movie ended, Oliver had fallen asleep against Daniel's shoulder, drooling slightly on his shirt. Sophie had migrated to the couch next to her mother. Clara looked down at her sleeping son and then at Daniel, trapped under a 5-year-old in a blanket fort. Sorry, she whispered. Don't be, Daniel whispered back. Clara carefully lifted Oliver, who barely stirred, and carried him toward the stairs. I'm just going to put him down for a nap. I'll be right back. Daniel extracted himself from the fort and found Sophie still on the couch, back on her tablet. Your brother fell asleep pretty fast, he said, sitting down. He always does that. Mom says he runs on turbo mode until he crashes. That's a good way to describe it. Sophie glanced at him, then back at her screen. Are you going to keep coming over? Do you want me to? She shrugged, but it was the kind of shrug that meant something. I guess it's okay. You're not as annoying as Mom's last boyfriend. High praise. He talked too much and kept trying to teach me stuff, like I'm stupid or something. That sounds annoying. It was. She was quiet for a moment, then added, You're better at forts. Daniel smiled. Thanks. Clara came back downstairs looking relieved. He's out cold. We might actually get an hour of quiet. Miracles happen, Sophie said without looking up. Clara sat down on the couch next to Daniel, close enough that their shoulders touched. She looked exhausted, but also more relaxed than she'd been all day, like she'd been bracing for disaster and was slowly realizing it wasn't coming. So, she said quietly, still think you can handle this? Daniel looked around the living room, at the fort still standing in the middle of the floor, at Sophie absorbed in her tablet, at the scattered toys and the general disorder of a house where kids existed. Then he looked at Clara, at the worry still lingering in her eyes despite her attempt at humor. Yeah, he said. I really do. She studied his face, searching for doubt, for the moment when he'd realized this was too much and start planning his exit. But Daniel just looked back at her, steady and certain, and eventually something in her expression softened. Okay, she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. Okay. They stayed on the couch, not saying much, while Sophie played on her tablet and the house settled into a rare moment of peace. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't some perfect movie scene where everything clicked into place. It was just real, messy and complicated and full of chaos waiting to happen again. But it was enough. When Daniel finally left around 5 after Oliver had woken up from his nap and immediately demanded they build another fort after Sophie had shown him every drawing she'd made in the past month, after Clara had walked him to the door with that same mixture of hope and fear on her face. When he finally got back to his car and sat there in the driveway, he realized something. He wasn't scared. He'd walked into Clara's chaotic, messy, complicated life, and instead of running, he'd wanted to stay. More than that, he'd felt like he belonged there. Not because it was easy or simple or anything like what he'd imagined dating would be like, but because it was real. Because Clara was real, and her kids were real. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he was part of something that mattered. He texted her before he drove away. "Thanks for today. I meant what I said." Her response came a few minutes later. "Oliver wants to know if you're coming back. I told him maybe. He said maybe isn't good enough and I need to get a better answer." Daniel smiled. "Tell him definitely." That night, after Ethan was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Daniel sat on the couch with a beer he wasn't really drinking and thought about what came next. Because this was real now. This wasn't just coffee shop conversations or carefully controlled dates. This was actual integration, actual commitment, the kind of thing that couldn't be undone without hurting people. His phone buzzed. Clara again. "You really okay with all of this?" He typed back. "Stop asking me that. I'm serious. This is your out. If you want it, I don't want an out. I want this." A long pause. Then, "Why?" Daniel thought about how to answer that, about all the complicated reasons and the simple ones, about how she made him laugh and challenged him and didn't need him to be anything other than himself, about how her kids were chaotic and funny and real in a way that made him feel less alone, about how the mess didn't scare him because he understood it, but in the end, he kept it simple. "Because I like you, all of you, the whole messy package." Another pause, then, "Even the orange food demands? Especially those. You're insane." "Probably. But I'm still in." He could almost feel her smiling through the phone. "Okay then. Same time next week?" "Definitely." The next week became a pattern. Daniel would come over on Saturday afternoons, and it always started the same way. Oliver launching into whatever his current obsession was, Sophie pretending not to care but slowly warming up, Clara looking stressed until she realized everything was fine. They'd have lunch, build forts, watch movies, do the dishes, normal things, boring things, the kind of things that somehow mattered more than grand gestures or perfect dates. Ethan asked about it after the 3rd week. "You're gone a lot on Saturdays now," he said over breakfast one Sunday. "Yeah, I've been seeing Clara." "The girlfriend?" "Yeah." "Do I get to meet her?" Daniel paused, spatula halfway to the pan. He'd been so focused on integrating into Clara's life that he hadn't thought about the reverse, about what it meant to bring her into his life, into Ethan's life. "Do you want to meet her?" he asked. Ethan shrugged. "I mean, yeah, if she's important." "She is." "Then, yeah." It sounded so simple when Ethan said it, like it wasn't this huge, complicated thing, like people just met each other and it either worked or it didn't, and you dealt with it either way. Daniel brought it up with Clara that night over the phone, after both their kids were asleep and they could actually have a conversation that lasted longer than 5 minutes. "Ethan wants to meet you," he said. Silence on the other end. Then, "Oh, you don't have to. I just thought, I'm at your place every week and it feels weird that you haven't met him." "No, I want to. I do. I'm just..." She exhaled. "I'm nervous." "About meeting a 9-year-old? About meeting your 9-year-old. That's different. That's, what if he doesn't like me?" "He will. You don't know that. Claire, you make a living drawing pictures of animals with feelings. Ethan's going to think you're the coolest person alive." She laughed, but it sounded shaky. "When?" "Whenever you're ready." "Next weekend?" "Yeah, we could do something easy. Get pizza maybe, something low pressure." "Okay, yeah, pizza's good, pizza's safe." "Clara." "Yeah? Stop freaking out." "I'm not freaking out. You're definitely freaking out." "Okay, fine, I'm freaking out a little. But that's allowed. This is big, Daniel. I know. What if it goes fine? What if we all just have pizza and it's nice and no one has a meltdown and we all survive? She was quiet for a moment. Has anyone ever told you you're annoyingly optimistic? Literally never. I'm usually the pessimistic one. Then what's different? He thought about it, about why he wasn't worried, about why this felt less like a risk and more like an inevitability. I don't know, he said honestly. It just feels right. Yeah, Clara said softly. It does. The pizza night was scheduled for the following Saturday. Daniel spent the week trying not to overthink it, which meant he definitely overthought it. He cleaned the apartment more thoroughly than he had in months, bought the good pizza, not the cheap stuff, made sure there were drinks everyone would like, set the table, then thought that was too formal and moved everything to the coffee table instead. Ethan watched all of this with amusement. You know it's just pizza, right? He said. I know. You're acting like the president's coming over. I'm not acting like anything. I want it to go well. It's pizza. How badly can pizza go? Famous last words. Clara arrived at 6 with both kids in tow. Sophie looked suspicious of the new environment, clutching her tablet like a security blanket. Oliver was vibrating with energy, already asking questions before he'd even made it through the door. Is this where you live? Do you have any pets? Can we see your room? What kind of pizza did you get? Oliver, breathe, Clara said, looking apologetic. It's fine, Daniel said. Come in, pizza's on the way. Ethan appeared from his room, hovering in the hallway with the cautious curiosity of a kid trying to figure out if this was going to be weird or not. Ethan, this is Clara, Sophie, and Oliver, Daniel said. Everyone, this is Ethan. Hi, Ethan said. Oliver stared at him. You're tall. I'm not that tall. You're taller than me. You're 5. So? Sophie rolled her eyes. Oliver, stop being weird. I'm not being weird. Clara looked at Daniel with an expression that clearly said, see? This is what I was worried about. But then Ethan did something Daniel didn't expect. He walked over to Oliver and said, Want to see my Lego set? It's a spaceship. Oliver's eyes went wide. You have Legos? Yeah, a bunch. Can I help build it? Sure. And just like that, the two of them disappeared into Ethan's room, Oliver chattering nonstop about his own Lego collection at home. Sophie looked at her mother. Can I use the bathroom? Yeah, of course, Clara said. Once Sophie was gone, Clara turned to Daniel. That was easier than I thought. Told you. Don't get smug yet. The night's not over. The pizza arrived, and they all gathered in the living room, paper plates balanced on laps, the TV on in the background playing some animated movie Oliver had insisted on. It was cramped and chaotic, and nothing like the quiet dinners Daniel usually had with Ethan. But it was also warm, full, like his apartment had suddenly expanded to fit more life into it. Oliver talked through the entire movie, providing commentary no one had asked for. Sophie and Ethan ended up in a surprisingly serious conversation about whether dolphins or sharks were cooler, which turned into a debate about ocean ecosystems that was way more intense than it needed to be. Clara sat next to Daniel on the couch, their legs touching, and at some point she reached over and took his hand. This is nice, she said quietly. Yeah, it is. Your apartment's cleaner than mine. I had a week to prepare. Give me a normal Tuesday and it's a disaster. She smiled. I doubt that. They stayed like that for a while, hands linked, watching their kids exist in the same space. It wasn't profound. It wasn't life-changing. It was just normal. But normal felt revolutionary when you'd been alone for so long. When it was time for Clara to leave, Oliver threw a fit about not wanting to go. Sophie had to be pried away from an argument with Ethan about marine biology. Clara looked exhausted and apologetic and happy all at once. Thanks for tonight, she said at the door. Thanks for coming. So that went okay, right? Like, that was okay? Clara, it was great. She smiled, really smiled, and kissed him. Just a quick kiss, nothing dramatic, but it felt significant somehow, like a seal on something they'd both been building. After they left, Daniel found Ethan in his room, already in pajamas. So? Daniel asked. What'd you think? They're cool. Oliver's kind of hyper, but he's funny.
Sophie's smart.
And Clara? Ethan looked up from his book. She's nice. I like her. Yeah? Yeah, you should keep her around. Daniel laughed. I'm planning on it. Good. Ethan went back to his book, then added without looking up. Also, Sophie says dolphins are smarter than sharks, but I'm pretty sure she's wrong. That's a hill you want to die on? Absolutely. Daniel shook his head, still smiling, and left Ethan to his reading. Later that night, alone in his room, he got a text from Clara. Oliver says your apartment is awesome and wants to know when we can come back. Sophie says Ethan's okay, but wrong about sharks. Daniel. Tell Sophie that Ethan's ready to defend his position with sources. Are you encouraging a marine biology feud between our children? Maybe. You're ridiculous. But you like me anyway. A pause. Then, yeah, I really do. That was the turning point, not a dramatic one. Not a single moment where everything changed. Just a slow shift from careful to committed. From maybe to definitely. From two separate lives to something that was starting to look like one shared life. They still kept their own places, still maintained their separate routines during the week. But weekends became about all of them. Clara and her kids at Daniel's apartment, or Daniel and Ethan at Clara's house, or all of them together doing something normal like grocery shopping or going to the park. The kids bickered and bonded in equal measure. Clara and Daniel figured out how to parent in tandem without stepping on each other's toes. It was messy and imperfect and sometimes exhausting, but it was real. And for both of them, real was exactly what they needed. 3 months into their relationship, if you could call navigating the chaos of blended family life a relationship, Daniel learned that weekday mornings were where good intentions went to die. It started with a phone call at 6:30 on a Tuesday. Daniel was already awake, making coffee in the quiet darkness of his apartment, Ethan still asleep down the hall. His phone lit up with Clara's name, and his first thought was that something was wrong. Clara didn't call this early. Nobody called this early unless it was an emergency. Hey, he answered, already moving toward his bedroom to grab pants. Everything okay? Define okay. Clara's voice was tight, strained in a way he'd learned to recognize. The sound of someone holding it together by their fingernails. Oliver's sick. Like, actually sick. Threw up twice already. And I have a deadline today that I absolutely cannot miss. The client's already pushed it back once, and if I don't deliver by 5, they're going to pull the contract. And Sophie has a field trip that I'm supposed to chaperone, which I completely forgot about until she reminded me 10 minutes ago. And Clara, Daniel interrupted gently. Breathe. A shaky exhale on the other end. I'm breathing. What do you need? I'm not calling to ask you to fix this. I'm losing my mind, and I needed to tell someone. What do you need? He asked again. Silence. Then quietly, I need someone to watch Oliver while I work, but you have your job, and it's Tuesday, and I can't just... I'll call in, Daniel said. What? No, you can't do that. Why not? Because it's not your kid. Because you have responsibilities. Because, Clara, I'm calling in. Text me your address if Oliver's too sick to move, or bring him here if it's easier. Either way, I've got him. Daniel, I'm serious. Send me the address. Another pause. He could hear voices in the background. Sophie asking about breakfast, Oliver's small, miserable voice calling for his mom. Okay, Clara said finally. Okay, thank you. I'll bring him to you. That's probably easier. Give me 30 minutes? Take your time. She showed up 25 minutes later looking like she'd been through a war. Hair in a messy ponytail, no makeup, wearing sweatpants and a jacket that didn't match. Oliver was wrapped in a blanket, pale and quiet, in a way that was unsettling for a kid who usually operated at maximum volume. He hasn't thrown up in the last hour, Clara said, stepping into Daniel's apartment like she was carrying something explosive. But he might. Probably will, actually. I brought a bucket, and crackers, and ginger ale, and his stuffed dinosaur, which he won't sleep without. Clara, Daniel said, taking the bag from her. I've got this. I wrote down everything. When he last ate, what medications he can have, emergency numbers. I've got this. She looked at Oliver, then at Daniel, and something in her face cracked. Not broke, just cracked. like she'd been holding herself together for so long that having someone else step in felt disorienting. "I'll be back by 3, she said. 4 at the latest. Sophie's at her friend's house after the field trip. I arranged that this morning, so it's just Oliver. And if it's too much, if he gets worse, just call me and I'll—" "Clara." Daniel put his hands on her shoulders, making her look at him. "Go to work. Get your deadline done. I promise you, Oliver and I will be fine." She nodded, but he could see the doubt still lingering. The mom guilt that came with leaving your sick kid with someone else. She kissed Oliver's forehead, whispered something Daniel couldn't hear, and then she was gone, practically running to her car. Daniel looked down at Oliver, who was staring up at him with big, miserable eyes. "So," Daniel said. "Rough morning?" Oliver nodded. "You feel like you're going to throw up right now?" Oliver considered this seriously. "Maybe." "Okay, let's get you set up on the couch with the bucket, just in case." They made it to the couch without incident. Daniel arranged pillows and blankets, set the bucket within easy reach, and turned on the TV to something calm, some nature documentary about penguins that Oliver seemed too tired to protest. "You want anything?" Daniel asked. "Water? Crackers?" "My stomach hurts," Oliver said quietly. "I know, buddy. That's the worst part. I don't like being sick." "Nobody does." Oliver pulled his dinosaur closer, his face scrunching up in that way kids' faces do right before they cry. "I want my mom." Daniel's chest tightened. Of course he did. He was 5 and felt like garbage and wanted his mom. That was normal. That was every sick kid ever. "I know," Daniel said, sitting down on the edge of the couch. "But your mom has to work right now, so you're stuck with me. Is that okay?" Oliver sniffled. "I guess." "I promise I'm not as fun as your mom, but I'm pretty good at the sick kid thing. My son Ethan gets sick sometimes, and I've learned all the tricks." "Like what?" "Like how to make the best nest on the couch, and which TV shows are good for when you feel bad, and how to tell when you're about to throw up so we can get the bucket in time." Oliver's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "You get a weird feeling in your mouth, kind of tingly. That's your warning." "Oh." Oliver thought about this. That happened before. "See? Now you know." They settled into an uneasy peace. Oliver dozed on and off, waking occasionally to sip water or nibble a cracker. He threw up once more around 9, which Daniel handled with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been through this before. Bucket positioned, cool washcloth for his forehead, gentle reassurance that he was okay. "I got some on the blanket," Oliver said miserably after, his eyes filling with tears. "That's what washing machines are for," Daniel said, already stripping it off. "Not a big deal." "Mom's gonna be mad." "Your mom's not gonna be mad. She's gonna be glad you're feeling better." "How do you know I'm feeling better?" "Because you're talking more. When you feel really bad, you get quiet." Oliver considered this. "You're pretty smart." "I've been doing this for a while." Daniel called his office, explained he had a family emergency, and ignored the slight annoyance in his boss's voice. He'd take the hit to his vacation days. It didn't matter. Around noon, Oliver felt well enough to eat some toast. By 1, he was asking if they could watch a different show. By 2, he was sitting up and telling Daniel about the dream he'd had about dinosaurs playing soccer. "That sounds like a good dream," Daniel said. It was. Except the T-Rex kept cheating because his arms were too short to play fair. Classic T-Rex behavior. Oliver giggled, then stopped himself like he wasn't sure if feeling better was allowed yet. Clara showed up at 3:15, bursting through the door like she'd run the whole way from her car. "How is he? Did he throw up again? Did you have any problems?" "He's fine," Daniel said, gesturing to the couch where Oliver was dozing again, this time peacefully. "Threw up once more this morning, but nothing since. He's been drinking water and keeping down crackers." Clara's shoulders sagged with relief. She walked over to the couch, kneeling down next to Oliver and brushing hair off his forehead. He stirred, opening his eyes. "Hi, Mom," he said sleepily. "Hi, baby. You feeling better?" "Yeah, Daniel's good at sick days." Clara looked back at Daniel, and the gratitude in her eyes was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said. "I mean it. Thank you." "It wasn't a big deal." "It was to me." After Clara loaded Oliver into the car, he protested leaving, saying he wanted to stay because Daniel's couch was more comfortable than theirs.
Daniel watched them drive away and felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just dating anymore. This was actual partnership. The kind where you showed up when things fell apart, where you called in sick to work because someone else needed you, where you held a kid's hair back while he threw up and didn't think twice about it.
That night, Clara called him after both kids were asleep. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know."
"I mean it, Daniel. That was huge, and I can't just expect you to—" "Clara, stop. You didn't expect anything. You needed help, and I helped. That's what people do. Not everyone does, though. Most people would have said no, would have said it wasn't their responsibility. Then most people suck." She laughed, but it sounded wet, like she was crying. "I'm not used to this."
"Used to what?" "Having someone who just shows up, who doesn't make me feel like I'm asking too much just by existing." Daniel leaned back on his couch, phone pressed to his ear. "You're not too much. You're never too much. You say that now? I'll say it in 6 months too, and a year from now. I'll keep saying it until you believe me." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm falling for you. You know that?" His heart did something complicated in his chest. "Yeah? Yeah."
"And it's terrifying. I know, I'm falling for you too. This is the part where it usually goes wrong." "Maybe," Daniel said, "or maybe this is the part where it actually works." But 3 weeks later, they hit their first real fight. It started small, like most fights do. Clara had invited Daniel to her place for Sunday dinner, a regular thing now, something they did most weekends. But this time, she'd mentioned that her mother was coming, just casually dropped it into conversation like it wasn't a huge deal. "My mom's been asking to meet you," Clara said over the phone on Saturday night. "I figured tomorrow would be good. She's driving up anyway to see the kids." Daniel's stomach dropped. "Your mom?" "Yeah, is that okay?" "I mean, yeah, sure. I just didn't know you told her about me." "Of course I told her about you. She's my mom. We talk." "What'd you tell her?" "That I'm seeing someone. That you're great with the kids.
"That you make me happy."
Clara paused. "Is this weird? Are you freaking out?" "No, maybe. A little." "You don't have to come if you're not ready." "I want to come. I didn't expect to meet your family yet." "Daniel, you've been spending weekends with my kids for 3 months. You held Oliver's hair while he threw up. You're already part of the family. That's different than meeting your mother." "Why?" "Because kids are easy. Adults judge you." Clara laughed. "My mom's not going to judge you. She's going to ask you a million questions and probably embarrass me, but she's not going to judge you." Famous last words. Clara's mother showed up at noon with a casserole, opinions, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when she looked at Daniel. "So you're the one dating my daughter," she said, shaking his hand with a grip that was slightly too firm. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Daniel." "Susan, no need for ma'am. That makes me feel old." She turned to Clara. "Where are my grandchildren?" The kids appeared like they'd been summoned, and Susan's entire demeanor changed. She was warm and affectionate, scooping Oliver into a hug and listening intently while Sophie showed her a drawing she'd made at school. With the kids, she was exactly what a grandmother should be. With Daniel, she was polite, friendly even. But there was something underneath, a watchfulness, an assessment happening in real time. Dinner was fine. The food was good. Susan's casserole was actually amazing, and Daniel made sure to say so. The kids talked nonstop, filling any potential awkward silences. Clara seemed tense, like she was waiting for something to happen. It happened after dinner, while Clara was getting dessert and the kids had disappeared into the living room. Susan turned to Daniel with the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile. "So Daniel, Clara tells me you have a son." "Yes, Ethan. He's 9. "And his mother?" "We're divorced, have been for 3 years." "That must be difficult." "It was. We figured it out, though." "And now you're dating someone else with children." She said it lightly, like an observation, but there was weight to it. "That's quite an undertaking." "I guess it is." "Clara's been through a lot. Her ex-husband, well, I'm sure she's told you. He wasn't reliable. The kids suffered for it. She's only just gotten to a place where things are stable." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. "I'm not her ex-husband. Of course not. I'm just saying single mothers are vulnerable, and I'd hate to see my daughter get hurt again." Mom, Clara said from the doorway, her voice sharp. She was holding a pie, her knuckles white around the dish. Can I talk to you in the kitchen? Susan stood, all innocence. Of course, honey. They disappeared, and Daniel sat there alone at the table, his appetite gone. He could hear raised voices from the kitchen, not the words, but the tone. Clara, angry and defensive. Susan, measured and unyielding. When they came back 5 minutes later, both women were smiling, but it was forced, fake. The kind of smile you wore when you were pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The rest of the visit was strained. Susan left an hour later, hugging her grandchildren and giving Clara a pointed look that Daniel pretended not to see. After she was gone, Clara turned to him, her face flushed. I'm so sorry. She had no right to say that to you. It's fine. It's not fine. She basically implied you're going to hurt me, which is completely unfair. She's your mom. She's protective. I get it. Don't make excuses for her. I'm not. I'm just saying I understand where she's coming from. Clara stared at him. You're seriously not mad? Should I be? Yes, she insulted you. Daniel shrugged. She's worried about you. That's what parents do. I'd probably do the same thing if Ethan brought someone home in 20 years. That's different. How? Because Ethan's a kid. I'm 36 years old. I don't need my mother vetting my relationships. Maybe not, but she's going to do it anyway. Clara crossed her arms, frustrated in a way that told him this wasn't really about what her mother had said. It was about something bigger, about all the times people had doubted her choices or implied she couldn't handle her own life. You're too understanding, she said finally. Is that a bad thing? It's annoying. He smiled, noted. She didn't smile back. What if she's right, though? About what? About this being too complicated. About me being, what did she call it? Vulnerable. What if I am? What if I'm making a mistake? Daniel stood, walking over to her. Are you? I don't know. I thought I wasn't. But then my mom shows up and says all that stuff, and suddenly I'm second-guessing everything. Clara, your mom doesn't know what we have. She doesn't see how we are together. She just sees the surface. Two single parents trying to make something work. And yeah, from the outside, maybe that looks complicated. But from the inside, it doesn't feel that complicated to me. It doesn't? No. It feels right. She looked up at him, searching his face. What if it stops feeling right? Then we deal with it. But we don't sabotage it now because we're scared of what might happen later. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned her forehead against his chest, exhaling slowly. I hate that she got in my head. Parents are good at that. You're really not mad? I'm really not mad. You should be. Probably, but I'm not. She pulled back, looking at him with something that might have been relief or might have been something deeper. How are you so calm about everything? I'm not. I'm just good at pretending. That made her laugh, a real laugh this time, not a forced one. We're a mess, you know that? Yeah, but we're a mess together. Is that supposed to be romantic? I don't know, was it? Little bit. They stood there in their kitchen, the kids' voices drifting in from the living room where they were arguing about something inconsequential. The dishes still needed to be done. The house was still a disaster. Clara's mother's words were still hanging in the air like smoke. But none of it mattered as much as the fact that they were here, together, figuring it out. The real test came 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday night that Daniel would remember for a long time. Clara called at 8:30, right as Daniel was helping Ethan with his math homework. Her voice was off, tight and brittle, in a way he'd never heard before. Can you talk? She asked. Yeah, hang on. He stepped into his bedroom, closing the door. What's wrong? Sophie's teacher called me in for a meeting tomorrow. Said Sophie's been having behavior problems at school. Acting out, not paying attention, getting into arguments with other kids. Okay. Kids do that sometimes, right? Not Sophie. Sophie's always been the good one, the one who follows rules and gets along with everyone. And now her teacher's saying she's been disruptive for weeks, and I didn't even know because Sophie hasn't said anything to me. Maybe she's just going through something. That's what I thought. So I talked to her tonight, asked her what was going on, and you know what she said? Daniel waited. She said she doesn't like that I'm always with you now, that I don't have time for her anymore.
that everything's different and she wants it to go back to how it was before. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Oh. Yeah. Oh, Clara's voice cracked. I thought she was okay with this. She seemed okay. But apparently she's been bottling it up and now it's coming out at school, and I don't know what to do. Did you tell her? I tried talking to her. I told her nothing's changed, that I still love her the same, that you being around doesn't mean she's less important. But she just shut down. Wouldn't talk to me, just said she was tired and went to her room. Daniel sat down on his bed, his mind racing. What do you need from me? I don't know. Maybe we need to pull back, spend less time together. Give her space to adjust. Okay. Okay? Yeah, if that's what Sophie needs, then okay. Clara was quiet. Then, you're not going to fight me on this? Why would I? Sophie's your daughter. If she's struggling, we figure it out. But what if pulling back means, what if it ruins what we have? Then we deal with that too. But Clara, I'm not going to make you choose between me and your kid. That's not a choice you should ever have to make. She made a sound that might have been a sob. Everyone else would have made me choose. I'm not everyone else. I know, that's the problem. That's what makes this so hard, because I don't want to pull back. I don't want to lose this. But I can't sacrifice my daughter's happiness for a relationship, no matter how much I care about you. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Daniel thought about it, about what he actually wanted, what he actually needed from this. I'm asking you to let me help, to not shut me out because you think you have to handle this alone. Sophie's struggling, and that's hard, but we can figure it out together. How? I don't know yet, but we start by talking to her, both of us. We explain that I'm not trying to replace her dad or take you away from her. We show her that there's room for everyone. And if she doesn't want to hear it, then we give her time. We pull back like you said, but we don't disappear. We just adjust. Clara was crying now. He could hear it. Why are you being so reasonable about this? Because I love you. The words were out before he could stop them. Hanging in the air, real and raw and completely unplanned. Silence on the other end. Clara? You love me? Yeah, I do. That's a terrible time to tell me that. I know, but it's true. More silence. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. I love you too. His chest tightened. Yeah? Yeah, which is why this is so scary. Because I want this to work so badly, and I'm terrified I'm going to screw it up. You're not going to screw it up. You don't know that. Then let's not screw it up together. She laughed through her tears. That's still not romantic. I'm working on it. They decided to talk to Sophie together the following weekend. Clara warned Daniel that it might not go well, that Sophie might refuse to engage, or might say things that hurt. Daniel said he could handle it. He wasn't entirely sure that was true. Sophie was in her room when they knocked, sitting on her bed with her tablet, her face carefully neutral when she saw Daniel. Hey, Soph, Clara said, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Daniel hung back by the door, not wanting to crowd her. Can we talk? About what? About what you told me the other night. About how you're feeling. Sophie's jaw tightened. I don't want to talk about it. I know, but we need to. Because you're important, and if something's bothering you, I need to know. You already know, I told you. You told me you don't like that I'm spending time with Daniel, but I want to understand why. Is it because you don't like him, or because you're worried about something else? Sophie looked down at her tablet, not answering. Daniel cleared his throat. Can I say something? Sophie shrugged. Not a no, but not a yes either. He stepped further into the room, but didn't sit, kept his distance. I know having me around is different, and I know you didn't ask for things to change, but I want you to know something. I'm not here to take your mom away from you, or to replace your dad. I'm just here because I care about your mom, and I care about you and Oliver. You don't even know me, Sophie said, her voice small. You're right. I don't know you as well as I'd like to, but I'd like to change that. If you'd let me. Why? Because you're important to your mom, which makes you important to me. Sophie looked up at him then, her eyes sharp and assessing. Mom cried after you left last time, after Grandma came over. Daniel glanced at Clara, who looked surprised. She'd thought Sophie hadn't noticed. I didn't mean to make her cry, Daniel said carefully. Grandma said you're going to leave eventually, that all men leave. Clara's face went pale. Sophie, that's not… Is that true? Sophie interrupted, looking directly at Daniel. Are you going to leave? This was it. The moment that mattered more than any romantic gesture or perfect date. A 7-year-old was asking him point blank if he was going to break her mother's heart. And her heart too, probably, even if she wouldn't admit it. Daniel crouched down so he was at Sophie's eye level. I can't promise nothing will ever go wrong. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise that I'm not planning on leaving. I'm here because I want to be here. Not just for your mom, but for all of you. But what if you change your mind? Then I'll be honest about it. But Sophie, I've already seen the hard stuff. I've seen your mom stressed and exhausted. I've seen Oliver throw up all over my couch. I've seen the mess and the chaos and all the things that usually make people run away. And I'm still here. Sophie was quiet, processing this. Oliver threw up on your couch? Yep, got it on the blanket and everything. That's gross. Very gross. She almost smiled. Almost. What if I don't want you here? Then we figure that out. Maybe I come around less. Maybe we just see each other at certain times. Whatever makes you comfortable. But Mom would be sad. Maybe. But you being okay is more important. Sophie looked at her mother, then back at Daniel. You really think that? I know it. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers picking at the edge of her tablet case. Finally, she said, I don't hate you. That's a good start. I liked it when it was just us, me and Oliver and Mom. We had our thing. I get that, and you still have your thing. I'm not trying to break into that. I'm just trying to be around it, if you'll let me. Sophie looked at Clara. Can we still have Mom Sophie days, just us? Of course, Clara said immediately. Absolutely, nothing changes that. And you won't forget about me because you're always with Daniel? Never. I could never forget about you. Sophie nodded slowly like she was making a decision. Then she looked at Daniel and said, You can stay, but you have to learn the rules. What rules? Like, you can't just barge into my room, you have to knock. And you can't tell me what to do unless Mom says you can. And you can't try to be my dad because I already have a dad. Deal, Daniel said. Those are good rules. And you have to admit that dolphins are smarter than sharks. Daniel glanced at Clara, who was trying not to laugh. I will admit that dolphins are very smart. Sharks are also smart in their own way. Can we agree they're both smart? Sophie considered this. I guess that's fair. Good, because your brother and Ethan are never going to let this argument go if we don't find some middle ground. Sophie actually smiled then, small but real. Ethan's stubborn. Tell me about it. The conversation shifted after that, becoming less heavy. Sophie showed Daniel some drawings she'd been working on, detailed sketches of marine life that were honestly impressive for a 7-year-old. Clara watched them talk, relief visible in every line of her body. When they finally left Sophie's room, Clara grabbed Daniel's hand and squeezed it tight. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For not running. For showing up. For saying exactly the right thing. I didn't know if it was the right thing. It was. They stood in the hallway outside Sophie's room, the sound of Oliver's voice drifting up from downstairs where he was playing with his toys, and Daniel realized something. This was harder than he'd thought it would be. Not the relationship itself, but the constant navigation. The endless small negotiations and conversations and moments where you had to choose your words carefully because they mattered to someone small and vulnerable. But it was also worth it. Every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt. All of it was worth it for this. Standing in a hallway with Clara, their hands linked, knowing they'd just cleared another hurdle together. We're going to be okay, Clara said, like she was trying to convince herself. Yeah, Daniel said. We are. And for the first time since Susan's visit, since Sophie's teacher had called, since all the doubt had started creeping in, he actually believed it. The real work started after that conversation with Sophie, not before it. Daniel had been naive enough to think that one honest talk would fix everything, that Sophie would suddenly be comfortable and they'd all move forward in perfect harmony. But life with kids didn't work that way. Sophie tested him constantly over the next few weeks. Small rebellions, little challenges to see if he'd actually stick to what he'd promised. She'd ask him to get her something, then immediately say, "Actually, never mind, I'll ask Mom." She'd start telling him a story, then cut herself off mid-sentence and walk away. She'd agree to play a game with him and Oliver, then change her mind at the last second and disappear into her room. Clara noticed, and it made her tense in ways Daniel could feel even when she wasn't saying anything. "She's pushing you away on purpose," Clara said one night after both kids were asleep. They were sitting on her couch, the TV on, but neither of them really watching. "I can talk to her again if you want." "Don't," Daniel said. "She's testing me. Let her." "But it's not fair to you." "It's completely fair to her. She's 7 and her whole life got turned upside down. She gets to have feelings about it." "You're too patient." "Or maybe everyone else just isn't patient enough." Clara looked at him, something unreadable in her expression. "What if she never comes around?" "Then we adjust. But I'm not going anywhere just because a 7-year-old's mad at me." "Even if she stays mad for months?" "Even then." It took 6 weeks before something shifted. Daniel was at Clara's place on a Saturday afternoon, helping Oliver build an elaborate Lego spaceship that kept falling apart every time they got close to finishing. Sophie was at the kitchen table, allegedly doing homework, but mostly just staring at her worksheet with the kind of frustration that radiated across the room. "This is stupid," she announced to no one in particular. Clara was upstairs taking a work call that was supposed to be quick, but had stretched to 45 minutes. Daniel glanced at Sophie, then at the worksheet. Math. 3rd grade multiplication. "You need help?" he offered. "No." "You sure? Because you look pretty stuck." "I'm fine." "Okay." He went back to the Lego spaceship. Oliver was narrating an elaborate story about space pirates that made no sense, but was entertaining anyway. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. "Ugh!" Sophie threw her pencil down. "This is impossible." Daniel set down the Lego piece he was holding. "What's the problem?" "It's stupid." "Math's not stupid. It's just hard sometimes." "You don't even know what I'm working on." "You're right. Want to show me?" Sophie hesitated, her face scrunched up in that way that meant she was trying to decide if accepting help was admitting defeat. Finally, she pushed the worksheet toward him. It was multiplication tables. 7s and 8s, the ones that always tripped kids up because they didn't have easy patterns. "Okay," Daniel said, sitting down across from her. "What's giving you trouble?" "All of it." "Come on. You can't tell me you don't know any of these." "I know some of them, but then I get to the hard ones and my brain stops working." "That happens. Want to know a trick?" Sophie eyed him suspiciously. "What kind of trick?" "For 7s. There's a pattern, but it's weird. You have to look for it." "My teacher didn't say anything about a pattern." "That's because teachers sometimes forget that numbers can be fun. But trust me, there's a pattern." He showed her. The way the ones placed in the 7 times table went 7, 4, 1, 8, 5, 2, 9, 6, 3, 0, and then repeated. Not a pattern that made obvious sense at first, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Sophie's eyes widened. "That's weird." "Right? But it works." "Show me 8s." He did. They spent 20 minutes going through the worksheet together, Daniel explaining the tricks he'd learned when Ethan was struggling with the same thing last year. Sophie actually listened, actually engaged, and by the time Clara came back downstairs, the worksheet was done. "You finished your homework?" Clara asked, surprised. "Daniel helped me," Sophie said, and there was something different in her voice. Not quite warmth, but not the cold distance she'd been maintaining either. "He did?" "Yeah, he knows the patterns." Clara looked at Daniel, and he could see the relief in her eyes. Not because the homework was done, but because Sophie had accepted help from him without being forced. After that, things got easier. Not perfect, not seamlessly integrated, but easier. Sophie started asking Daniel questions again, small ones at first, like whether he thought her drawing looked good, or if he'd seen her tablet charger. Then bigger ones, like whether he thought it was fair that Oliver got to stay up later on weekends just because he didn't have as much homework. "Probably not fair," Daniel admitted. "But life's not always fair. That's what Mom says." "Your mom's usually right." "Usually," Sophie agreed with the kind of grudging respect kids had for parents who actually followed through on things.
Oliver, meanwhile, had decided Daniel was his new favorite person, which created its own problems because Oliver wanted Daniel's attention constantly and got jealous when Sophie got time with him. "Why does she get to do homework with you?" Oliver demanded one afternoon when Daniel was helping Sophie with a reading assignment. "Because she has homework and you don't."
That's not fair. You can hang out with us if you want, but you have to be quiet. Oliver lasted approximately 3 minutes before he was climbing on Daniel's back and asking if they could build a fort instead. "After Sophie finishes," Daniel said. "But that's forever. It's 20 minutes. Same thing." Clara watched all of this from the kitchen doorway, and when she caught Daniel's eye, she mouthed, "Sorry." He just shook his head and mouthed back, "It's fine." And it was fine. Chaotic and exhausting and sometimes maddening, but fine. The weekends when all 5 of them were together became their new normal. Daniel's apartment or Clara's house, it didn't matter. They'd pile into one space or the other, and the noise level would increase exponentially. 3 kids arguing about everything from what show to watch to whose turn it was to pick the snack to whether superheroes or dinosaurs would win in a fight. "Superheroes would obviously win," Ethan said with the confidence of someone who'd clearly thought about this extensively. "No way," Oliver shot back. "Dinosaurs have teeth and claws, and they're huge. But superheroes have powers, like flying and laser eyes. Not all superheroes have laser eyes. The cool ones do. Dinosaurs are cooler than any superhero. That's scientifically wrong. You don't even know what scientifically means." Daniel and Clara sat on the couch, watching this argument unfold with the weary amusement of adults who'd learned to pick their battles. "Should we intervene?" Clara asked. "Are they actually fighting or just arguing?" "Arguing, I think." "Then no." Sophie, who'd been ignoring both boys, looked up from her book. "They're both wrong. Dragons would beat everyone." "Dragons aren't real," Ethan said. "Neither are superheroes." "Yes, they are. They're in movies." "Movies aren't real life. Some of them are based on real things. Name one superhero based on a real person." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. "That's not the point." Daniel caught Clara's eye and saw her trying not to laugh. These were the moments he'd remember, he thought. Not the big dramatic declarations or perfect dates, just this. 3 kids arguing about something meaningless while he and Clara sat together, comfortable in the chaos. But comfort didn't mean easy. There were still hard days. Days when scheduling fell apart and someone forgot to pick someone up from practice and dinner became whatever could be microwaved in 5 minutes. Days when the kids were fighting and Clara was stressed about a deadline and Daniel had his own work crisis to deal with. Days when it felt like they were all just barely holding it together. One of those days came in late spring, 6 months into their relationship. Clara called Daniel at work, which she never did unless it was important. "My ex is in town," she said without preamble. Daniel's hand tightened around his phone. Clara's ex-husband, the kid's father, lived 3 states away and hadn't visited in over a year. "Okay, when?" "Now. He showed up this morning. Didn't call first, didn't warn me, just knocked on the door and said he wanted to see the kids." "Did you let him?" "Of course I let him. He's their father, but Daniel, I don't trust him. Last time he visited, he made all these promises about being around more, about calling regularly, and then he disappeared for 8 months. And now he's back and the kids are excited and I can already see how this is going to end." "What do you need?" "I don't know. I needed to tell someone. I needed you to know in case this blows up." "Do you want me there?" "No. Maybe. I don't know. He doesn't know about you yet and I don't want to make this more complicated." "Clara, I can handle complicated. I know you can, but I need to figure this out with him first. I'm scared he's going to hurt them again. And I don't know how to protect them from that." "You can't," Daniel said gently. "They love him. You can't protect them from loving someone who might let them down." "That's the worst part." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I should go. He's taking them to the park. I told him they need to be back by 5 for dinner." "Call me later?" "Yeah, I will." She didn't call. Daniel tried not to read too much into it. She was dealing with her ex, with the kids, with all the complicated emotions that came with someone walking back into your life after months of absence. She needed space. He could give her that. But when she didn't answer his text that night, and then didn't answer his call the next morning. Worry started to creep in. He finally drove to her place Sunday afternoon, telling himself he was just checking in, making sure everything was okay, not being weird or clingy or overbearing. Clara's ex-husband's car was in the driveway. Daniel sat in his car for a full minute, debating whether to turn around and leave. This wasn't his business. This was her family stuff, her ex-husband, her situation to handle. He had no right to insert himself. But then the front door opened and Sophie came out, followed by Oliver, both of them looking upset. Behind them came Clara and a man Daniel assumed was their father. Tall, good-looking in that casual way some men were, wearing expensive jeans and a designer jacket. They were arguing, not loudly, but intensely. The kind of argument where you kept your voice down because the kids were there, but the anger was real underneath. Daniel got out of the car. Clara saw him first, and the look on her face was complicated. Relief mixed with embarrassment, mixed with something that might have been frustration. "Daniel," she said, "I was going to call you. I was in the neighborhood." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Her ex-husband turned, assessing Daniel with the quick, dismissive glance of someone sizing up competition. "Who's this?" "This is Daniel," Clara said, her voice tight. "Daniel, this is Marcus, the kid's father." Marcus didn't offer his hand. "Right, the boyfriend." "The boyfriend?" Sophie said, looking between them. "Mom, you told Dad about Daniel?" "Of course I did, honey." "When?" "Yesterday, when he asked." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Just trying to understand who's been around my kids while I've been away." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. "Nice to meet you." "I'm sure." Marcus turned back to Clara. "Like I was saying, I think 2 weeks is reasonable. I'll take them back to my place. Let them see where I live now, spend some real time together." 2 weeks? Clara's voice went up. "Marcus, they have school. They have routines. You can't just take them for 2 weeks. I'm their father. I have rights." "You have rights you haven't exercised in 8 months. That's because work's been crazy. You know how it is." "I know how it is. I'm a single parent running a business from home while raising 2 kids alone. Don't talk to me about work being crazy." "I'm not doing this in front of them," Marcus said, glancing at Sophie and Oliver, who were watching the whole exchange with wide eyes. "Or in front of your boyfriend. Then maybe you should leave." "I will. But we're not done talking about this." "Yes, we are. You don't get to waltz back in after months of nothing and demand 2 weeks. You want time with them? You build up to it. You prove you're going to stick around. Ooh, so I'm being punished for having a job? You're being held accountable for being absent. There's a difference." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue more, but then his eyes flicked to Daniel and he seemed to think better of it. "Fine. I'll call you tomorrow. We'll figure out a schedule." "A schedule you'll actually follow?" "Clara, I mean it, Marcus. Don't promise them things you won't deliver. They're kids. They don't understand why you disappear." "I don't disappear. I have a life." "So do they. And you're barely in it." Marcus's face hardened. He turned to Sophie and Oliver. "I'll see you guys soon, okay? Real soon. We'll do something fun." Sophie nodded uncertainly. Oliver just looked confused. Marcus walked to his car and the tension in Clara's shoulders didn't ease until he'd driven away. "Mom?" Sophie said quietly. "Is Dad mad at us?" "No, baby. He's not mad at you. He's just... Adults are complicated sometimes. He said he'd take us to the beach." "I know he did." "Is he going to?" Clara's face did something painful. "I don't know, honey. I hope so." After the kids went inside, Clara turned to Daniel. She looked exhausted, wrung out, like she'd been fighting a battle she knew she couldn't win. "I'm sorry you had to see that," she said. "Don't apologize." "I should have called you back. Dealing with him takes everything I have, and by the time he left last night, I just crashed." "It's okay." "It's not. You drove all the way here because I didn't answer, and then you walked into that mess." "Clara, I don't care about that. I care that you're okay. Are you okay?" She shook her head. "No, not really. He does this every time, shows up full of promises, gets the kids' hopes up, and then disappears again. And I'm the one who has to pick up the pieces when they're crying because he forgot to call or canceled plans at the last minute. And I can't stop him from seeing them because he is their father, but I also can't protect them from how much it hurts when he lets them down." Daniel pulled her into a hug, and she collapsed against him like all the strength had drained out of her body. "I'm so tired of this," she said into his chest. "I'm so tired of him making me the bad guy because I won't let him swoop in and disrupt everything whenever it's convenient for him. You're not the bad guy. He makes me feel like I am. Like I'm keeping his kids from him instead of just trying to maintain some stability. That's because he doesn't want to take responsibility. It's easier to blame you than to admit he's been absent. The kids don't see it that way. They just see Dad wanting to spend time with them and Mom saying no. They'll understand eventually, when they're older. But what about now? What about when they think I'm the reason he's not around?" Daniel didn't have an answer for that. Because she was right. Kids didn't understand the complexities of adult relationships. They didn't understand that sometimes loving someone meant setting boundaries, even when those boundaries felt cruel. They stood there in her driveway for a long time, Claire's arms wrapped around him, both of them quiet. Finally, she pulled back. "I need to go check on them. Make sure they're okay. You want me to stay? Would you?" "Of course." Inside, Sophie and Oliver were in the living room, unusually subdued. Oliver was playing with his dinosaurs without his usual enthusiasm. Sophie was on the couch with her tablet, but she wasn't really looking at it. "You guys okay?" Clara asked, sitting down between them. "Is Dad going to take us to the beach?" Oliver asked. "I don't know, buddy. Maybe." "He said he would." "I know he did. But you don't think he will." Clara's face did that thing again. The painful thing that came from loving your kids so much and hating that they had to learn disappointment this way. "I think your dad wants to, but sometimes adult stuff gets in the way." "You mean work," Sophie said, not looking up from her tablet. "Yeah, work and distance and a lot of other things." "Does he not want to see us?" "Of course he wants to see you. He loves you both so much." "Then why doesn't he visit more?" Daniel watched Clara struggle with how to answer that, how to be honest without making their father into a villain, how to acknowledge the hurt without adding to it. "Sometimes people have trouble following through," she said finally, "even when they mean well. And that's not your fault. It's not because of anything you did or didn't do. It's just how some people are." "That's not fair," Oliver said. "No, it's not. I don't like it." "I know, baby. I don't either." Sophie finally looked up. "Is Daniel going to leave too?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Clara looked at Daniel, and he saw the fear in her eyes. The worry that promising something to Sophie would somehow jinx it, that saying no, Daniel's not leaving, would tempt fate. But he'd made a commitment to honesty, even when it was hard. "I'm not planning on it," Daniel said, sitting down on the coffee table so he was at Sophie's eye level. "But I can't promise nothing will ever change. What I can promise is that if something does change, I won't just disappear. I won't make promises I can't keep, and I won't stop caring about you guys just because things get hard." "How do I know you mean it?" Sophie asked. "You don't. Not yet. But I'm going to keep showing up, and eventually you'll see that I mean what I say." Sophie studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded and went back to her tablet. It wasn't a declaration of trust. It wasn't a guarantee of anything, but it was acceptance, and right now, that was enough. The rest of the day was quiet. They ordered pizza because no one had the energy to cook, watched a movie that Oliver picked, which meant it was loud and colorful and had approximately zero plot. Clara fell asleep halfway through, her head on Daniel's shoulder, and he didn't move because waking her seemed cruel. When the movie ended, he carefully extracted himself and helped get the kids ready for bed. Oliver wanted 3 stories instead of 1. Sophie wanted to show him the new drawing she'd made of a dolphin, which she informed him was definitive proof that dolphins were cooler than sharks. "It's a very convincing argument," Daniel said seriously. "I know." After they were both in bed, Daniel found Clara in the kitchen, staring at nothing. "Hey," he said softly. "Hey. You okay?" "Just thinking." "About?" "About how you didn't have to stay today. How you could have walked away when you saw Marcus's car. But you didn't. Why would I walk away?" "Because it's messy. Because dealing with exes and kids and all this baggage is a lot. Most people would have run." Daniel sat down next to her at the kitchen table. "I'm not most people. I'm starting to realize that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "It's terrifying," Claire said, "because I keep waiting for the catch. For the moment when you realize this is too much and you're done. And it hasn't happened yet, and I don't know what to do with that. You don't do anything with it. You just accept that I'm here, that I'm staying. What if you change your mind? Then I'll tell you. But Clara, I've seen the worst of this. I've seen the hard conversations and the difficult days and the ex-husband drama, and I'm still here. Doesn't that tell you something? She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. It tells me you're either incredibly patient or incredibly stupid.
Maybe both. That made her smile, small but real. You're ridiculous. So you keep saying, but you're also... She stopped, shaking her head. You're also the best thing that's happened to me in a really long time. Daniel reached across the table, taking her hand. Same. Even with all the chaos? Especially with the chaos. You're definitely stupid then. Probably. They sat there in her kitchen, hands linked across the table, the house quiet around them. It wasn't perfect.
It wasn't some fairy tale ending where all the problems disappeared. Marcus would still be an issue. The kids would still struggle. Life would still be messy and complicated and hard. But they were in it together, and that made all the difference. Marcus lasted 3 more weeks before he disappeared again. He'd called twice after that confrontation in the driveway, made vague promises about scheduling visits, and then went silent. No return calls. No texts. Just gone, the way Clara had predicted he would be. Sophie noticed first. Dad hasn't called, she said one night at dinner, pushing pasta around her plate without eating. I know, honey, Clara said, her voice carefully neutral. He said he would. He said we'd talk about the beach trip. Sometimes adults forget to follow through. You don't forget. That's because I'm here every day. It's easier to remember when you're close. Sophie looked at her mother with eyes too wise for 7 years old. You're making excuses for him. Clara's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I'm trying to explain. He forgot about us again. Just say it. The silence that followed was painful. Oliver looked between his mother and sister, his face scrunching up like he might cry. Daniel, who'd been helping Ethan with seconds, felt the whole table tense. You're right, Clara said finally. He should have called. And he didn't, and that's not okay. So why do you keep saying it's fine? I'm not saying it's fine. I'm saying it's complicated. It's not complicated, Sophie said, her voice rising. He doesn't care about us as much as we care about him. That's not complicated. That's just sad. She got up from the table and went to her room. Clara started to follow, but Daniel touched her arm. Let me try, he said quietly. Clara looked exhausted. She's really upset. I know, but maybe that's okay. Maybe she needs to be upset. He found Sophie face down on her bed, not crying but radiating the kind of anger that came from feeling powerless. Daniel knocked on the door frame even though the door was open. Can I come in? I guess. He sat on the edge of her bed, not too close. You were pretty tough on your mom down there. She keeps defending him. She's trying to help you not hurt as much. But I do hurt, and pretending I don't just makes it worse. Daniel nodded. You're right. That's actually really smart for someone your age. Sophie rolled over, looking at him suspiciously. Are you going to tell me Dad's busy and he still loves me? No. I'm going to tell you that your dad's screwing up, and it's not your fault, and being mad about it is completely fair. She blinked, surprised. Really? Really. You know what the hard part is, though? What? You can be mad at someone and still love them, and you can recognize they're messing up while also knowing they probably don't mean to hurt you. People are complicated like that. They can love you and still let you down. That's stupid. It really is. Sophie was quiet for a moment. Does your dad let you down? Sometimes. Not as much anymore because I'm older and I don't need him the same way. But when I was a kid, yeah, he missed stuff, forgot stuff. Made promises he didn't keep. Did you get mad at him? All the time. Did it help? Daniel smiled. Not really, but it felt better than pretending everything was fine. Sophie considered this. I don't want to be mad at Dad. I want him to just be here. I know, but you can't control that. You can only control how you deal with it. By being mad? By being honest. With yourself and with your mom.
She's trying to protect you, but maybe you don't need as much protecting as she thinks. Sophie sat up, pulling her knees to her chest. Daniel? Yeah? Do you promise you won't do what Dad does? I promise I'll try really hard not to. But Sophie, here's the thing. I'm not perfect. I'm going to mess up sometimes. I might forget something or say the wrong thing or disappoint you, but when I do, I'll own it. I'll apologize. I won't just disappear and act like nothing happened. How do I know you mean it? Because I keep showing up, even when it's hard, even when your dad's around and everything's awkward, even when you push me away, I keep showing up. She nodded slowly. Okay. Okay. Yeah, you can stay. It was such a simple thing to say, but Daniel felt it land in his chest like something heavy and important. Permission. Acceptance. Maybe not, but she is, and that's not a bad thing. Clara finally looked at him. What'd you tell her? That it's okay to be mad, that her dad's screwing up, and it's not her fault. That people can love you and still let you down. You told her that? She needed to hear it. She was tying herself in knots trying to make sense of why he keeps disappearing. Sometimes the answer is just that adults are messy and they make bad choices. Clara leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. I spent so long trying to shield them from how bad it is, trying to make excuses so they wouldn't think their dad didn't care. But they already knew. Kids always know. I just wanted them to feel loved. They do, by you, every single day. You're the one who shows up. You're the one who does the work. Marcus gets to be the fun dad who swoops in occasionally, but you're the one actually raising them. They know that. Do they? Sophie just told me upstairs that you never forget stuff, that you're always here. That's what matters. Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she wiped at them angrily. I hate that he does this to them. I know, but you can't control him. You can only control how you respond. That's what you told Sophie, isn't it? Seemed like good advice for everyone. She laughed despite herself, crossing the kitchen to hug him. Thank you for dealing with my mess. It's our mess now. Is it? Yeah, it is. The summer came gradually, school ending in a chaos of field trips and final projects and end-of-year parties. Daniel had been with Clara for 9 months, though it felt both longer and shorter than that. Longer because of how much they'd been through. Shorter because he still sometimes woke up surprised that this was his life now. They'd fallen into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Weeknights were usually separate, Daniel with Ethan, Clara with Sophie, and Oliver. Both of them managing homework and dinner and bedtime routines in their respective houses. But they'd talk every night after the kids were asleep, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour. Weekends were together, sometimes all 5 of them, sometimes just the adults if they could arrange childcare. They'd learned which activities worked, parks, movies, anything with physical activity to burn off Oliver's endless energy, and which didn't, nice restaurants, anything requiring sitting still for more than 30 minutes, shopping trips that involved more than 2 stores. Ethan's relationship with the other kids had evolved into something that looked like actual sibling dynamics. He and Sophie had their ongoing marine biology debate, which had expanded to include complex arguments about ocean acidification and coral reef preservation. He mostly ignored Oliver unless Oliver was being particularly funny or particularly annoying. It was normal, real, the kind of thing that happened when kids spent enough time together to stop performing. Claire's mother came around eventually, not in a dramatic way, no tearful apology or acknowledgement that she'd been wrong, just a slow thawing. She started asking about Daniel when she called. Started including him in family plans, started referring to him as Clara's partner instead of that man you're seeing. The shift happened over Sunday dinner at Susan's house in July. Daniel had been nervous about it. A formal family dinner felt loaded with expectation, but it had gone fine. Better than fine, actually. Susan had asked him about his work, about Ethan, about his divorce with the kind of directness that was uncomfortable but honest. You seem stable, she said over dessert, like she was delivering a verdict. Thanks? I mean it. Clara needs stable. She's had enough chaos. Mom, Clara warned, I'm just being honest. You did. And Daniel seems like he's not going anywhere. Daniel caught Clara's eye across the table. She looked mortified, but he just smiled. I'm not planning on it. Good. The kids like you. That matters. It was the closest thing to approval he was going to get, and honestly, it was enough. But the real turning point came in August, on a perfectly ordinary Saturday that became extraordinary by accident. They'd planned nothing special, just hanging out at Clara's house, maybe going to the park if it wasn't too hot. All three kids were there. The house was its usual level of chaotic.
Oliver was building an elaborate Lego city that took up half the living room floor. Sophie and Ethan were on the couch, trading a tablet back and forth while watching videos about marine conservation. Clara was in the kitchen trying to make lunch, while also fielding a work call that should have ended 20 minutes ago. Daniel was helping Oliver with his Lego city when Sophie came over holding the tablet. "Can we show you something?" she asked. "Sure."
Yeah? Yeah, Sophie said. "We already looked at the schedule. There's one next Saturday. You have to register in advance, but there's still spots." "Did you ask your mom about this?" "We wanted to ask you first, because if you say no, then there's no point asking Mom." Oliver abandoned his Legos to join the huddle. "Are we going to the beach?" "Maybe," Sophie said, "if Daniel says yes." Three kids staring at him, waiting for an answer. Ethan with his hopeful expression.
Sophie with her serious one, Oliver bouncing with anticipation. "I think that sounds great," Daniel said, but we should definitely check with your mom." Clara appeared in the doorway, finally off her call. "Check with me about what?" The kids all started talking at once, explaining about the marine conservation program and the beach cleanup and how they wanted to go as a family. Clara looked at Daniel over their heads, something unreadable in her expression. "What do you think?" she asked him. "I think it sounds perfect." "All of us?" "All of us." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that reached all the way to her eyes. "Okay then, let's do it." The following Saturday, they piled into Clara's minivan, which Daniel had learned to drive out of necessity, and made the hour drive to the coast. The kids were loud and chaotic, arguing about who got which window seat and whether they'd see dolphins. Clara navigated while Daniel drove, her hand occasionally reaching over to rest on his leg. "This is crazy," she said quietly, during a rare moment when all three kids were distracted. "What is?" "This. All of us. Going to a beach cleanup like we're some kind of normal family." "We are a normal family. You know what I mean? A year ago, I couldn't imagine this. Couldn't imagine someone wanting this. Someone wanting you and your kids and all the chaos that comes with it? Yeah." Oliver found a dead crab and insisted on giving it a funeral, which involved a lengthy ceremony and a eulogy that was mostly about how crabs were cool, but not as cool as dinosaurs. They worked for 2 hours, then stayed at the beach afterward. The kids played in the waves while Daniel and Clara sat on a blanket watching them. "Sophie's really bossy with Ethan," Clara observed. "He needs it. Otherwise he'd just argue with her all day. Oliver follows him around like a puppy. He looks up to him. Ethan pretends he's annoyed, but he loves it." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "They look like siblings." "Yeah, they kind of do." "Does that weird you out?" Daniel thought about it, watched the three kids playing together, their laughter carrying over the sound of the waves. Ethan showing Oliver how to jump over waves. Sophie building a sandcastle with architectural precision. The easy way they existed together, like they'd always been this way. "No," he said. Clara picked at the label on her beer bottle. "I'm thinking that this is the most stable thing I've had in years. That you've completely integrated into our lives and it feels normal now. That my kids ask for you when you're not around. That I can't really imagine what it would be like if you weren't here." "Okay. Okay. That's all you're going to say?" "I'm thinking the same thing, that this isn't temporary for me. That I love you and I love being part of your life. That when I think about the future, you're in it. All of you." Clara set down her beer, turning to face him fully. "You love me? I told you that months ago." "I know, but it's different now. Things are real now. We've made it through the hard stuff. We've made it through some hard stuff. There's going to be more." "I know, but we keep making it through." "We do." She was quiet for a moment, then, "I don't want to do this separately anymore." "Do what separately?" "This. Our lives." "Clara, I've wanted that for months. I just didn't want to push." "Really?" "Really. I love you. I love your kids. I love this messy, chaotic life we've built. I want all of it." She kissed him then, and it tasted like salt water and beer and relief. "So we're doing this?" she asked when they broke apart. We're doing this. Which house? Probably yours. It's bigger, and the kids are already settled here. But your apartment can be sold or rented, I don't care.